Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question: what is good garbage? Hello, hello. I'm always amazed by nature's basic building blocks. Nature uses mostly sugars, which is hydrocarbon chains, and it uses proteins, which is amino acids. And both of these come together with different minerals and certain chemicals to create all the products, all the packaging that we see around us. Today, I have my friend Paul Krochak join us, who works on cellulose mostly. And he's been doing some amazing things in a beautiful organization called Rise in Sweden. We have worked as an organization with him for one significant project, but then numerous conversations over the years. And I've always been amazed with his depth of knowledge in the subject of cellulose. He's worked on creating nanocelluloses. He's worked with numerous companies on significant products. This will be a very exciting conversation, and I'm excited again to learn from him and share with you. So enjoy the conversation. Hello, hello. I'm so happy to have my friend Paul Krochak with me today. We've worked together a few times, and Paul, so happy to have you on this podcast. Thank you for joining in.
Hey, thanks, Ved. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start with a question that you would not expect. And I did not know this side of you. What's the swim run business?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a sport which was born in Sweden, and Sweden is on the Baltic Sea, of course, and there's an It's basically an archipelagos. I think it was about 2005. There was about 8 or 10 fellows in the bar on one of the islands, and they had a few too many beers, maybe some other Swedish schnapps, and they made a bet with each other if they could run and swim from the north of the Stockholm archipelagos to the south, 26 islands in total, without stopping. And the only rule was whatever you start the race with, you have to finish with. So you have wetsuits, of course, and shoes, and you run in your wetsuit and swim in your shoes. And this sort of, they cleared it in a little over a day. And the next year there was about 20 people, and you do this in teams of two. The next year there was 50 teams, and then this has really grown into this big sport. So you essentially swim and run across islands as fast as you can, just carrying any gear with you. And it turns out to be a lot of fun.
But okay, getting to what we are here to talk about, I don't think even in our personal conversations we've talked much about this. I want to talk more about your early life and what influenced it to go in the segments that you did, because you did some very interesting things in terms of studies.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to get into paper and fiber-based packaging, it's very, unless you come from a family who does that, most people just kind of tumble into it. So, I can't say that anything, in my early life, I was kind of like any other Canadian boy, played a lot of hockey, swimming, all the sports and whatnot, and didn't really like school. But then eventually, after, some years of fooling around, I realized that I really liked mathematics and then physics and then eventually fluid mechanics. I met who ended up being my PhD professor, and he was giving me some summer work. And it was very fluid mechanics related, fiber suspensions, forming, this kind of business. And it was financed by the paper industry. And for me, I didn't really care. I had no interest in paper still. I just thought, hey, this is cool. I'm getting paid to do some research in this area. And then it turned into a PhD, and then it turned into a job. And then all of a sudden you realize that this is really a fascinating industry with a whole just a million different challenges and technical aspects and still many issues which aren't well understood. So you kind of fall in love with it, and then eventually in the later years really got into the packaging side of things and circularity, and now of course this is such a hot topic. So it's as I say, you just kind of tumble into these things, and then all of a sudden you realize that this is just a really wonderful industry, and it's hard to leave.
Yeah, it definitely sucks you in. Like similar to my story, I had no plans of getting into this industry, even though my family had this business, but still. So, but yeah, it does suck you in. But that's interesting. So your education is not at all in cellulose. Then you're now the head of research at the premium institute in the world. which does cutting edge kind of work. So how does this transition take place?
Well, I don't know. I think it's, as I said, the industry is so complex, and what's kind of cool about it is there's so many different things that you can learn. I was have no chemistry background, but eventually got into the wet end chemistry because I had sort of looked at all the forming and water removal and this kind of stuff. So then the chemistry, well, this is kind of new and this is interesting. Learned that, and then it just kind of takes you different places. And then the next thing was, well, let's learn about cellulose. And now my real interests are more on the recycling side of things and replacing plastics and so kind of in a sense leaving a lot of the technical stuff behind and sort of looking at bigger pictures. But that's the thing, it's I think that when you spend your life in this, you meet those old superstars of the industry and they know everything, and it's just because you have that possibility to kind of move around to different processes and always stimulate yourself.
Yeah, and I think it also brings a freshness into the industry. So, on that note, it'll be interesting to know how you got into Inventia, Rise. And I think for the listeners, I don't think everybody would know about Inventia and Rise and the work it does. So, I think if you can elaborate those two ideas together, please.
It was kind of a funny story. So I'd been working in the Canadian industry, similar, doing the same kind of business at an R&D institute, and just kind of one day I woke up and realized, I'm tired of this. I've been here doing the same thing for 10 years, and the industry was really struggling in Canada at the time because it was so based on newsprint, and this was really when newsprint was not the place to be. So I was actually going to take a job in, believe it or not, offshore oil. And so I went up to Aberdeen and I took an interview and basically got offered the job. And on the way back, I had my last conference in pulp and paper, the big FRC conference, which happens every 4 years in Cambridge. And so I went there and I thought, this is great. And this is my last conference. And then I realized, wow, I really love this industry and I love these people. And as luck would have it, somebody from then Inventia, the person who hired me, happened to be there, and he said, look, I need somebody with exactly your skill set. I need it now. Would you just at least come to Stockholm and have a look? And I thought, well, look, I've never been to Stockholm, so if you want to pay for a trip for me out there, sure. And got out there and was just like, wow, this institute is amazing. Like, of course, you get kind of enamored by the giant paper machine we have, but just going around and all of the infrastructure and competences and meeting all of these people who were doing great research and just got really inspired, and instantly it was a no-brainer. So, you know, Inventia, I'll start with the former Inventia, which was focused on the forest industry. So, I mean, pulp and paper was the base. And then, of course, at the time, everyone's talking about new materials and replacing plastics and oil-based products. And so this is sort of what Inventia's background is. And what was really interesting about it, it's when I came from really more the research side of things, and here it was all about innovation and working with companies and helping companies be more competitive sustainably. And this was really cool. And my boss was really into that. So I sort of got this fast track education on innovation. So that's really cool, and that's really the core of what Rice offers and Inventia. We're an innovation partner. Of course, we do the research projects, the EU projects, and that's a big part of our what we do. But it's a lot working directly with industry and getting to know companies' processes and challenges and strategic goals. And so that's what Rice really does. It tries to support the industry, and so Rice now is really an amazing creature. It's the merging of over 30 research institutes, four major ones, and then their sort of daughter companies. We have something like 130 test beds, and now bringing all of these competences together. We have some major areas: digitalization, mobility. One really big one where I'm mostly involved is called material transition, and it's this is where fiber-based packaging fits in, and increasing the circularity and reducing plastics waste and carbon emissions, carbon footprint associated with materials, and in particular packaging. So it's now that we're Rice, the former Inventia was really fiber-based packaging. Now we've got competences that are just really light years ahead with barrier technologies and application of barriers. We've got groups working with food, but in particular the interaction with food and packaging from the food point of view. Whereas, let's say, the former Inventia and the packaging group, we look at the product, we look at the packaging towards the product. So finding these synergies and how we can really look at this if we call it packaging waste or packaging circularity or sustainability question, we can look at it from a system perspective, because I mean, a package by itself is nothing. It's with the product that it means something. And, when we start talking about circularity, we have to look at this whole system perspective. So, I mean, these are some of the things that we do, and obviously cutting edge, the big, as I said, the big area for us right now is replacing plastics and building up the barriers, and how do we get paper to go through the form fill seal process that's built for plastics, the 3D molded fiber, the barriers, the shelf life. Yeah, and then the recyclability, looking at traditional recycling processes, how can we optimize to handle the more complex packaging designs, and then looking to more advanced things like pyrolysis to recycle paper mill rejects. So, we really cover the full spectrum. It's a fun place to work, fun place to be.
Oh, for sure. I've visited your institute so many times, and I'm always come back with my mouth hanging open, like, wow, these guys are doing some really, really amazing work, and it's so wonderful to see that. But it'll be great to elaborate on the kind of packaging projects that you're currently working on. What is exciting you the most? Pick five of your favorite projects that will make the biggest impact to this planet.
So probably my favorite one, and this one's just started, but it's we've very recently started up a Horizon EU project. So we have 24 different companies across Europe, and the project has two main goals. One is to replace substitute plastics with fiber-based packaging. So here we're looking at, as I already touched on, designing the paper and the barrier in combination with the form fill seal operations, the flow wraps and the thermal forming. Also the 3D molded fiber to replace rigids, and then building up these barrier structures, understanding if we go over to the fiber base, do we have to compromise on shelf life? And if so, what's the compromise, and how can the brand owners then work around this? And so this project's, as I say, just started up, but our intent is we're targeting 10 different food products, and our intent is to run pilot scale and actual packaging real products at the brand owners by the project's end. The other track, and I think this is also interesting, is looking at reuse models and how can we make reuse models work. So I'm sure people are familiar with reuse, but if you're not, the idea is that you keep the same pack and you return it, it's refilled. So instead of that take, make, throw, hopefully recycle, this is keep that one package circulating. And it's a nice concept, and or people are looking at it, but we're looking sort of at how would the system actually have to look or be set up. Some of the LCA costs with reuse packaging is transport, so it's going to be lightweight, and then in this case, what distance between collection sites and return sites or reuse sites, distance optimization, also optimizing cleaning procedures. So now you have to clean the packs, and how do we standardize that? Bearing in mind an LCA perspective, we can't overuse water, we can't overuse heat in the water. How do you standardize pack format so that it can be shared by the entire packaging ecosystem, so that not just one big brand owner or 5 brand owners and 2 big retailers sort of have a system, but the entire system. So if we're going to detergents, a standardized detergent pack. If it's a drink, a standardized drink, so that the big brand owners and the small brand owners can share this packaging system. So that's a really cool one. I'm really excited about that. And of course, those kinds of projects on the replaced plastics, the flexibles and the rigids, this is really big. We're seeing so much interest right now in the 3D molded fiber, both dry molding and wet molding, again, to replace rigids. And this is a really exciting area. Another really, really cool project we have, I sort of touched on this, but we're looking at catalytic pyrolysis to try and recycle the polyolefin fraction coming from recycled paper mill rejects. And this is another interesting issue. There's a lot of new recycling technologies for repulping and extracting the fibers, but always you're stuck with the polyolefin or the polyaluminum if it's a beverage carton or a septic. So how do we recycle this? How do we actually turn this back into value-added, high-value materials that can be reused? You said to pick 5. I think within, though, there's probably 4 or 5. Those are two of the ones I really like. We've got another really cool project, and this is a bit of a project group, but we've had a really successful public funded project and it was trying to use post-consumer plastic. How do we use post-consumer recycled plastic in consumer packaging in a safe way? And the idea here really is we build up multi-layer films or recycled plastics, and basically what we do is we use very thin layers of virgin plastics on the outer plies, which will be in contact with the product or the environment, and then very thin layers of, we'll call it a migration shield. And then in the middle, we pump in as much PCR, post-consumer recycled plastic, as possible, so that you've got these thin layers to prevent migration of dangerous substances, and the thin layers on the outside to be in contact with product or environment. And this is a really cool one because it was actually quite successful, and we did some demonstrators for a couple of different products. So that was a cool one. And then another one I have to mention, and this is really one of our favorites. We had recycled corrugated provider, Containerboard. Presumably, people know, recycled fibers aren't as high performing as virgin fibers. But in this case, we set this really ambitious goal. We're going to create a containerboard from recycled liner, which performs as well or outperforms the best in class in Europe virgin fiber board. So this was a huge project run really, really quite quickly. I think we achieved these goals in 18 months. It was a huge undertaking, and we were eventually able to demonstrate this in our pilot park and took it out to the mill where it was of interest, and it was so successful that this company eventually spun it off to 5 other mills. So what's kind of cool about that is this idea that recycled fiber is it's kind of a low quality fiber. It's not at all true. I mean, with a little bit of magic, paper making magic, paper chemistry, you can get the recycled fibers to perform as well or better than virgin material.
Want to learn more about regenerative packaging? Tune into our Trivia Tuesdays on LinkedIn and Instagram stories. Follow at Good Garbage Podcast and learn something new every Tuesday. But I want to stay a little longer with flexible packaging because that's a field that has come up again and again, and it's a complex challenge to crack, and you clearly seem to be very buoyant on it. So I want to look at it from two aspects, performance as well as cost. So when I look at performance, and it's typically WVTR of under 1, which is water vapor transmission rate for the listeners who may not know that, and we still want it compostable with a decent shelf life, and ideally they don't want a huge cost increase. So it'll be great to hear from you how you are seeing cracking this problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's say there's two aspects, the technical and the economic. So if I start with the technical, I think, getting the barrier properties down, water vapor down to order 1, oxygen transmission down to order 1. This is definitely doable. I mean, we have solutions, even bio-based. What the trick here now is that you really need to be clever in how you build up your barrier. There's no single barrier formulation, but that's widely available, more or less widely available. There's this new bio-based PET, which people are talking about. It's also been said to be the polymer that doesn't exist because there's so little of it. PHAs are similar, I think, maybe not quite as well performing, but still the availability isn't there yet. So what you really need to do is to start to build up very, very thin layers, going after the OTR, creating a good surface, going after the moisture barrier. And here now you can get very clever. There's a number of different solutions out there which can get you in that ballpark. Bio-based, recyclable. You may need to even go to a third layer or combine things. Even lignin can capture the UV protection, even give antioxidant properties. So that's the first thing, the barrier, building them up. But we're strictly speaking, we're there on a 2D laminate. I mean, we've come down even below 1 and 1 in oxygen and water vapor, getting a good cob and good grease resistance. Then the trick is, you put that down on a 2D surface, will it survive the form, fill, seal, the packaging operation? And this is a bit more of a challenge, and this is actually where I think quite an exciting area, and sort of where my interests are really getting captured, because now we have this interaction between the paper, the barrier, we'll call it the substrate, and the forming machine or the packaging line. And here I think this is an open area of research. There's a couple of companies who are doing some interesting work. without major rebuilds, but slightly modifying what's called the forming shoulder or the forming collar, sort of where the paper goes into these machines. You can make it a little bit more forgiving on the paper itself. And then tweaking the mechanical properties of the paper. I don't think we need to do too much more there, but this is sort of old paper making. We've been doing this stuff for centuries. So that's the technical side. I think we're very close. There's a little bit to do. Then the economic side. So as you said, I kind of touched on the forming machine or the packaging machine. Nobody wants to have to do a full rebuild. So how can we tweak it, keep the costs down there? But then the material itself. This is today a challenge. I usually say virgin plastics are essentially free, which they, relatively speaking, they are. And that's why the brand owners love them and they perform so well. How do we allow paper to compete, or bio-based even to compete with that? It's hard today, but at least in the EU, the EU Commission is trying to help level the playing field. So the EU Commission is right now about to release, I think it's going to be in November, an updated packaging waste directive. And this is really going to be a driver. And sort of the guiding light or the North Star for the packaging waste directive, all the directives in the EU, is the European Green Deal, which basically wants to level the playing field. And what we're talking about now is, in the Green Deal, taxes on virgin plastics. The packaging waste directive is going to, at least what they're saying, they're going to, with their EPR, extended producer responsibility fees, modulate it. So now if you're putting a very complex, non-recyclable, non-compostable packaging design on the market, you're going to have to pay for it. And the EPR fees then go to handling the recycling system, the waste management, because it's not the municipality's job. It's the brand owners and the value chain who's making the money, not the municipalities. So that's one thing. The EPR fees will be a big driver, and then setting legal requirements on percentage recycled material in packaging, requiring the EU to meet reasonably ambitious, not ambitious enough for plastics, but recycling targets, setting very clear bans on certain materials which are hazardous or potentially pose a risk to humans. So, I think today it's an unlevel playing field, and the cost is by far in favor of virgin plastics. But I think very, very quickly this is going to change. And we see that because the brand owners, they're making these commitments. And even from our Rice's perspective, 2 years ago, even we would talk with the brand owners, and they would show them what we're doing, and they say, hey, this is really interesting. Can you please go talk to our suppliers? Now they're coming to us and saying, look, can you please give us a design, a process, a material, the full blueprint that we can then take to our suppliers and say, this is what we want. Please give it to us, or else we're going to find another supplier who can. So yeah, it's still an unlevel playing field, but I think that's going to be changing in the very, very, very near future. By 2025, I think we'll see a lot more paper.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear, and I'm glad that you are in the thick of things and you're seeing that yes, it can be compostable and it can have the right barrier properties. So where are you on that? And is this only controlled conditions, or do you think it will compost anyways?
Yeah, the compostable one it's an interesting one. Ideally you have both recyclable and compostable. And again, it still is a bit of I say a question mark, just because of what you touched on. Is it industrially compostable? Is it terrestrial compostable? Is it naturally compostable in soils? I haven't gone down the compostability path deep enough. I see at the end we always need to find somebody who will finance these projects. So kind of following with the low-hanging fruits. And what I see is the low-hanging fruit is recyclability. And I'm thinking now from a brand owner's perspective, we need to do this because we need to still be profitable. And so crack the recyclability one. Once we're getting close on the recyclability, which we are, the compostability has to come in. But it's a complex question, and it's one which everyone is struggling with, because what should I focus? Should I go after compostable? Should I go after recyclable? And I don't think we have this answer yet. And I think this is another research question, not technical in the sense of molecules and water vapor transmission, but a little bit more system perspective and big picture. Where should we focus on compostable? Where should we focus on recyclable? When should we focus on both? So it's a tricky question, and I haven't gotten myself deep enough into that, but it's one which we, the compostability though, it's always going to be there. And again, the friendly EU Commission who wants to ensure this is really where the Single-Use Plastics Directive comes in. They want to get the garbage off the beach, so those plastic products which are ending up on the beach, those have to go. Good. If we can replace it with something compostable, then we solve the issue. So, there's, I think, for the single-use plastics directive and what they're looking at, I think this is where the compostability is really the key. But then it extends, we've got the beverage cartons, and these things. Sure, we've still got the polyolefin, and this it ends up in rejects and then gets burned or landfilled. Can't we make those compostable? So it's there, and I think it's I don't want to say the next question, but it's a really important question.
And it's wonderful to hear that you're looking at multi-layered substrates being recycled, because that's obviously been a challenge. It's the complexity of having different substrates. But I want to actually segue a little bit towards another product, and that's to do with what you spoke about in terms of molded fiber. And I presume you're looking more at rigid packaging from that. And I would love to learn what are the things that you're looking at, what are the kind of solutions that you're working on in order to use that technology and take it forward.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the rigids that people are going after, and there's a number of questions here. Is what can be done in terms of geometries, performance? I'm thinking mainly mechanical performance, and then the big one is cost reductions. Again, when we go into the rigids, this is where there's a big gap I see today in going from rigid plastic to rigid fiber-based 3D formed. So these are some of the big ones, and then it's been around for decades, but now it's sort of getting a better understanding of it. If we want to think that, I forget what the market is today for 3D molded projects. I want to say around 500,000 tons in Europe per year, plus or minus. We see that that's going to go up probably to some million tons. So how can we start to get these things out on the market in a cost effective way? And then we come back to the barrier question. But at the end of it, it's a lot of basic understanding which we still don't really have, But I think we'll really accelerate the journey here, the innovation journey, because we have the 200 years of paper making to rely on. So I think that all of this is going to fast track. But it's a really interesting area because it's quite open for the optimization, open in terms of R&D for the optimization that we've done with paper and board products. So there's a lot, but again, it comes down to mechanical performance. What shapes can we achieve? Barrier properties, is it compostable, is it recyclable? And here I think is a good one for compostability, especially if you have food, because things when you have food residues and maybe the recycling mills aren't going to want to take it back for either safety or performance quality reasons, this is a nice one for compostability, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of it's the barrier technology, and it's also not just the substrates. It's also to do with the process. Like these machines are churning out in a few seconds hundreds of products. How do you, in a cost-effective way, take it and coat it with something else then? And of course, there are companies across the world who are doing it, but then you have to be cost effective. So now I know that you guys were so early on, and I'm talking maybe even 15 years back is when I saw your work on nanotechnology. And you were one of the probably the earliest in the world in terms of that technology. And of course, there was a lot of thought that went into it. It'll be great to hear how you're looking at using nanofibers in terms of barrier. And how are you seeing that? How is that evolving? And how is that going to impact the world of packaging?
We're still seeing it as an incredible strength agent, and I think that'll never change. When we look at the strength agent side of things, it comes to a cost question. When we started working with it, we've got some very high performing versions of nanocellulose or production methods or qualities of nanocellulose. Maybe these are a little bit unnecessary for as a strength additive. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you produce in a cost-effective way? And of course, we're seeing companies doing this, the Fiberleans and the Cadence got a variant. So that's interesting. But now I think we're seeing it's always been extremely attractive as an oxygen barrier. I mean, here we can come down to the tenths or the hundredths in terms of OTR or oxygen transmission. So it's a first layer. It gives you the oxygen. It also gives you a smooth surface, so you can get a better adhesion to go after the moisture barriers. So I think that there's still quite a bit to be done, and it relates a lot to the cost point of view, cost performance. And then, of course, there's other things, people are spinning threads from it and high performance threads and all this kind of business. I don't really see that as packaging. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely, in my world, when we're going to the bio-based barriers, high performing barriers, nanocellulose is the first layer that goes down. and then you start building up on top of that.
Super interesting. I know that your process was, I think, quite a lot of mechanical in nature. Has that evolved much? How is the evolution going to take place so that nanocelluloses actually come into the mainstream of barrier?
Yeah, I see it. The trend that I see is staying with the mechanical, but what we were always working with was the homogenized. So you do some sort of enzymatic pretreatment to try and make it a little bit more energy efficient to fibrillate the fibers, and then you run it through a homogenizer, which is a quite an energy consuming beast. You get a great high quality fiber. So I see the trend now going towards more refining, the mechanical grinding and this kind of business, and still getting the quality out. So this is really the trend that I see. Unless we can somehow improve even more of the homogenizing process from an energy and runnability point of view, that could be the trend. But what I see more and more is going to the mechanical, just because it's a cost issue.
The other material that I know that you guys have looked at, the whole biorefinery concept came, with that came the lignin and the lignosulfonates. Is there much happening in that area still? Do you see that as something for the future that will come out of cellulose based product mills?
Absolutely. I'm suddenly in the last year become a huge fan. I've always thought lignin was interesting, but really opening up to the possibilities and as a barrier. So there's three routes that you can go that we're looking at. One is a very simple one. And instead of talking about nanofibrillated cellulose, we talk about ligno-nanofibrillated cellulose. And we always thought get rid of all of the lignin and make as pure a cellulose, a nanocellulose from pure cellulose as possible. What we're seeing now, actually, if you keep some of the lignin, you get a little bit of a I'll say you get a little bit of a water barrier. Nanocellulose loves water and moisture. So I want to say you get a less bad moisture performance. You actually do get some moisture performance. We're also looking at lignin-based emulsions. So you use this as a coating layer in itself. Or another interesting area is ligno-nanoparticles. So you kind of spray the nanoparticles on top of a layer of nanocellulose. I think it's really interesting. There's still a number of challenges. The positive is that you do get a moisture barrier. You still need something else to get the high performance to go down to the order one in OTR, WVTVR. But you get an okay moisture barrier, you get UV protection, and you get an antioxidant effect. So it gives a bit of a functionality to your packaging. The challenges which I see, lignin suffers from the odor issue. And what will transfer to your food? Will it change the taste or the smell? And this is a bit of a sensitive area. There's still maybe some, I wouldn't say risks, but maybe a couple of toll gates to pass in terms of product safety and migration. I don't think it's an issue, but it's some things which really need to be sort of standardized and approved and whatnot. But I think it's a real one with real potential. Again, going to bio-based, it's abundant, um, and it seems to perform quite well.
Again, that's great to hear. In a couple of episodes back, we had two absolutely amazing women from an organization called Canopy. And they are, of course, very focused on the areas that you are talking about in terms of recycling and also in terms of agri fiber. How do you see this? Like I know Sweden is such a big forest industry. How do you see protection of old growth forests? Is there a transition happening, and are you getting more projects around agri fiber?
Yeah, of course, there's a huge amount of interest in agrofibers right now. Bagasse is a big one, hemp, wheat straw. There's a lot of interest in it. And we are getting more and more projects. There's two things. One, and I want to come back a little bit to the compostability. Where does compostability, where do I see it as most important here and now in the short term is in those regions where there aren't well developed recycling systems, recycling capacity, collection, etc. So, and that's one area. So we're seeing the 3D products is absolutely a big area. Another big area where I see globally is in tissue. What the industry, particularly packaging, what we really want to have is closed loop recycling. The agro fibers, at least in Europe, in the recycling stream, they'll get classified in sort of the bad group because everyone wants the long craft fibers. But I think where it's really interesting is for open loop recycling. So now, if I say recycling, because by using an agro fiber, you're recycling it. Otherwise it would have been burned. So I think in products like tissue globally, I think this is really interesting. Or others where it's just we're not going to have a closed loop system. We're not. Nobody wants to recycle used toilet paper. That's at least not yet. So that's really interesting. And then again, in the paper and board packaging products, where particularly in regions where there aren't well-developed recycling systems for all fiber-based packaging or paper products, I think it's extremely relevant. And then some other areas where I think are also really interesting, coming back to the compostability, is in, again, it's open loop recycling, things that will get thrown away. So one thing which is quite popular in Sweden right now is this shift away from plastic bags to paper bags and highly compostable, because we put the bags, we need to put our garbage in them, and we throw them away. Making those things compostable, particularly with food residues and this kind of business, this is just, for me, a really sweet spot for agrofibers.
Tell me, you mentioned there's a lot of brands now that are coming to you. Earlier, it was, of course, Inventia, and then Rise was mostly the timber-based kind of industry. Now you see a lot of brands come to you and work with you. What are the kind of brands, at least if you can't mention their names, that are coming? What is the sectors that are showing the most interest in shifting, and how are you seeing this progression as we go forward?
I don't want to say all the brand owners are coming to us, but I would say all in the sense of there's no, this groups and not that groups. I mean, those who have the rigid plastics, they're looking at the 3D forming and wanting to see, can you help us with a concept? The flexibles, so it's the big brand owners. What's kind of interesting is we're meeting a lot of brand owners who I didn't, I've used their products, but didn't know what the brand was, where they have really, they have the complex packaging. A very common flexible is the PEPA. And this has to go. I mean, this one in Sweden, they've said, we're not taking this anymore. So, you come up with a whole bunch of different things like hand sanitizer. That was one brand which I thought, wipes. But really, it's amazing the different brands that I didn't know existed who are coming to us and saying, what can you do? And then the interesting thing is, you get sort of the big brands who know what they want to do. They've got the internal capacity to set the strategy, and they've got the people following the legislations and all. But then what's kind of interesting, you find the middle to smaller brands who are very profitable, they don't have the capacity to do this in-house, to even create the strategy. What should we do? We know we have to change. We know our packaging designs are going to get rejected by the market or have an EPR fee that we can't afford. Help us. We don't know what to do. Should we go bio-based? Should we go compostable? Should we go recyclable? Should we go to monomaterial? Should we go to paper-based? What's it going to cost in shelf life? What's the LCA? Help. We don't know what to do. We're just confused. It's like a deer in the headlights, frozen. So those are also kind of interesting. I actually just got off a call before you with a really successful brand owner who's just in that problem. There's 15 of us working with this question. We're 100% busy with customers. We know we've got to do something. We just don't know what to do.
Over to my last question. As Paul, what does good garbage mean to you?
This is a good question. I mean, my first answer would be any garbage is bad garbage. Everything should be circular. But what I think good garbage for me is garbage, and now thinking that we're going to do something we're going to recirculate the garbage. Good garbage for me is garbage which is free of hazardous or toxic items. As long as there's no health risks, and I won't say risks to the environment because plastics in this, of course, is. But the point is toxic free, so that we can safely take it and create value out of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining in. This has been an absolutely illuminating conversation, as all conversations with you are. But thank you so much for accepting this invitation. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And of course, most of all, thank you for doing the work that you guys are doing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ed. Great seeing you again.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage podcast. What questions do you want us to answer in our next episode? DM us on social media with your questions and ideas at Good Garbage Podcast on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.